The next speaker in my list, this is the president of the Global Security Institute, Mr. Jonathan Granoff. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to talk a little bit about some reality, but I want to get a sense of the knowledge base of the audience. How many people here don't know how many nuclear weapons there are in the world? Just give me an idea. Okay. Well, it's pretty significant. So there's somewhere between 13 and 14,000 of them. During the height of the Cold War, do people know how many there were? There were over 65,000. So we've come down considerably. We know how to get rid of them. That's a fact. That's important. It happened because there was a commitment that arose in 1985 when two gentlemen, Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan, said a nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought. But they also said at that meeting, neither of us shall seek military advantage over the other, because there was an insight that Gorbachev had that we needed to shift our perspective from the obsession with military nationalism essentially to a more human-centered approach. He identified the environment and he identified the nature of modernity as forcing humanity to see itself holistically. That was his insight. So now, let's go a few decades. Where are we today? Today we now know, we didn't know then, that we're melting the polar ice cap and we're putting the very third lung of the planet, the phytoplankton, at risk. 50 to 70% of our oxygen comes from the phytoplankton. If we continue to change the pH of the oceans, we might lose that. We can have plan A and plan B, but we don't have planet B. We know that we've heated up the planet with as much CO2, hasn't had this much CO2 in over 3.5 million years. We're destroying species at 1,000 to 10,000 times the evolutionary base rate. We've destroyed 60% of the mammals on the planet since 1970. We have dead zones in the ocean. We are putting approximately 5.25 trillion pieces of plastic in the oceans each year. In other words, the way in which we're operating our relationship collectively to the natural world is destroying the regenerative processes of nature. That is a fact. And none of these issues, the climate, pandemics, the oceans, the rainforests, can be solved at the level of the obsession of national militarism. And so, arranging our security around a 5th century Roman maxim, prepare for peace, receive war, prepare for war, receive peace, is no longer realistic. It's dreaming. By accident, design, or madness, those nuclear weapons that are on alert today will be used. And we now know from the science that if less than 1% of them are used, it will cause at least 5 million tons of soot to be in the stratosphere, rendering the agricultural base of civilization dysfunctional, and billions of people will die. We're not talking about a full-scale nuclear exchange, just a minor one. Could this happen? Are we at a risky moment? Absolutely. So let's talk about what has happened in the past. What can we learn? We know that in times of crisis and times of war, in the fog of war, the ability to be reasonable, rational, patient, and analytic diminishes considerably. In 1961, in Goldsboro, North Carolina, there was a Boeing B-52 Stratus Fortress plane going over it, and it crashed. 5 of the crewmen ejected. 1 of them died on the plane. Another one died being ejected. And that plane carried a bomb that was 3 to 4 megatons. That is approximately 210 to 280 Hiroshima bombs in one bomb. And 3 out of 4 of the triggering devices went off. If that 4th triggering device had gone off, it would have gone critical. over 250 Hiroshimas. An accident, planes crash. In 1979, there was a senator visiting Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado, and somebody wanted to show how efficient our system was, and they put a training tape in the computer. Well, the training tape alerted all of the whole system that there was a full-scale Soviet launch. And we almost went to war. A year later, there was a 46-cent computer chip in a satellite that misread the sunrise. It indicated there were 200 Soviet missiles coming at the United States. In 1983, Stanislav Petrov, who saved the world, was watching the computers in Moscow, and they showed a full-scale American launch. But he didn't pass the information up the command and control because he knew that if he did, 11,000 nuclear warheads would be rained down on the United States. So he violated his protocols and kept it to himself. Why? Because he was a computer engineer, and he told me he believed in God. In 1995, there was a weather satellite launched off of Norway. And when the satellite got to about 1,450 kilometers in the air, it looked to the Russians, because the Soviet Union was over then, it looked to the Russians like a Trident launch of a submarine that would be the initial launch of a high-altitude nuclear explosion, which would fry the electrical system of Russia. The Norwegians had told the Russians they were going to do this, but it didn't get passed up the command and control, and Boris Yeltsin had 8 minutes to decide whether to launch his arsenals before the high-altitude explosion. But he said that he didn't see that Bill Clinton would do something like that. We're not in a world today where there's that kind of security, where there's that kind of trust. So Kazakhstan, it's logical that Kazakhstan would take a leading role in trying to get us back to some degree of sanity, because it's a country that understands that people matter, so it doesn't have animus to any other countries. It's the only country in the world with excellent relations with the United States, China, India, and Russia, because it's a multicultural country that knows that the abuses of modern technology are real. There's over 1.5 million people there with cancers, leukemias, horrific birth defects because of the nuclear testing that took place on the soil of Kazakhstan. So it's in the DNA of the country to deal with it realistically, which I must say as an American, we don't deal with this realistically. And I dare say that in discussions, even in this august conference, the centrality of this issue is not being recognized. Because if we get every other issue right and miss this one, it won't matter. And if any of these errors lead to an exchange, nothing else matters. This is the moral and litmus test of modernity. So we've been gathering in this global alliance of leaders, and I'm going to read some of the language that we're working with to give a sharing of what we think could be done now, and just some of the analysis that we have, and then the conclusion of what we think is something that can be achieved that will help reduce the risk and hopefully create a little bit safer space and momentum in the right direction. It's a modest proposal. It's not the treaty banning nuclear weapons. It's not even the test ban treaty. It's very modest, but it's very meaningful. So we believe that the chance of actual use of nuclear weapons is higher than in any previous point in history. All nuclear states should unilaterally confirm that they will not use nuclear weapons first. No institution or other mechanisms is required for such a no first use policy. In a world enthralled by great power politics, someone must speak out on behalf of humanity, of our shared interest as a species. Out of the 193 members of the United Nations, only 9 possess nuclear weapons, yet the costs of a nuclear war will be borne by all. Modern science highlights the severe climate risk associated with a nuclear war. And I'm just going to read sections of it. It's not long, but time is of the essence.
But
Most of the
but
regimes...
this document is still under
It's
consideration.
still under consideration.
Because now, so I would like just to say that we are looking to finalize the language of this document within the dinner.
Yeah, so it's in consideration, but let's consider it. Most of the regime's treaties and mutual assurances, constructive ambiguities, norms, and technical mechanisms that were meant to govern nuclear weapons disarmament have in recent years eroded the nuclear taboo that we all depend upon. We need to recognize that as a fact. I've been to every nuclear non-proliferation treaty conference since 1995. So I spent the month of August at the NPT conference, and I've never seen such cynicism before. It was really disturbing. I mean, because the currency of the realm for trust has been corroded, and trust is more important than anything. And that's the worst consequence of Ukraine, is that trust has, and the failure to live up to commitments that have been made. Test ban treaty, fissile material cutoff treaty, lowering the operational status of the weapons. So we need to face an inconvenient truth. The deterrence-driven stability of the Cold War was linked to bipolarity, but in a multipolar world, the risks of miscalculation increase. We're at the beginning of a new nuclear arms race. Nuclear arsenals are again growing for the first time in decades. Technological developments and countermeasures and threats of actual use of nuclear weapons against non-nuclear states add to the grim situation. I mean, just think of this. The purpose of nuclear weapons is to pursue security. But the more the weapons are perfected, the more they're modernized, the less security we obtain. So the how is contrary to the why. And right now, the process of modernization only increases the likelihood of use and the severity of use should that occur. For progress to be made, the world must engage with the nuclear powers. The most pressing issue for our collective safety is to reduce the chance of nuclear weapons being used. To this end, the taboo against the use must be strengthened. No first use is a low-hanging fruit. China and India already have such policies in place. For the non-nuclear states, such a pledge should be treated as a sign of decency, and I would say human decency, because at the end of the day, these horrific devices that we've created to bring about security are all about a loss of our humanity. The idea that in order to protect something that we've created, states, created in the 1640s to stop religious war in Europe, things that we've created, we're willing to put the entire future of humanity at risk. Yeah. So I will end with a quote from a manifesto written by Albert Einstein and Bertrand Russell. They said, "Remember your humanity, forget the rest." Thank you.